Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with another episode of the Hill Country Artist Podcast. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to have with me Randall McCabe. Randall, first of all, welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with us today.
Thanks for the invitation.
Randall, you're one of Kerrville's artist's newest residents. So, where did you come from?
Most immediately, I came from a place called Houston, Texas.
I think it's a town somewhere east of here.
Yeah, it's over in Louisiana somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere.
And
I've heard of it.
yeah, I lived in Houston for 40 years,
No,
but started coming to the Hill Country back in the mid 80s and learned about Kerrville then. And of the 40 years I lived in Houston, 39 of them, I wanted to live here.
I hear you. I went to Camp Stewart as a little boy in the 60s.
Did you?
And fell in love with the hill country then, and I said if I could ever have the chance to move here, I would, and I did, so here I am. Tell us one of the things I've enjoyed about this podcast series is finding out when people really fell in love with art, and sometimes it's been a six-year-old girl who had a crazy aunt who made her paint. Sometimes it's been in a high school art class. Sometimes it's been a woman who retired and age 67 took up painting. But what's your journey in art?
Wow. It started early. I was very good at drawing as a little boy. And up through high school years, I usually spent more time making drawings in my room than doing the homework. But my mother was a nice artist, a good artist, and and so I was maybe predictably sent to college after high school to study architecture.
We've heard that story too.
Yes, and but I spent all my time taking art classes and drinking beer and having a good time. And about I was halfway through my sophomore year, spring semester sophomore year, I decided to withdraw and wrote the dean a letter and backed out of the college scene altogether because I knew I was spinning my wheels. Long story short, I spent 4 years in the Navy after that and ended up, after a number of peregrinations, ended up in Seattle, Washington, working in a shipyard and taking art classes at night. And I did that for a year. And I found it so rewarding and worthwhile that I quit my job at the shipyard and started to study art full time at a place called the Cornish College of the Arts out in Seattle. It was called the Cornish Institute back in those days, but they have upscaled themselves over the years. It was a great place.
What brought you to that little town called Houston?
I say there's a lot of reasons. The short one is I really never felt comfortable in the Pacific Northwest. I think it was the climate, moist and cloudy most of the time. And I decided I wanted to go someplace that was sunny and warm. And Texas has always been a mysterious place for me since I was a young boy. And uh, I just decided Houston would be a good move. Fourth largest city in the country. This was 40 years ago. I think it's still fourth. And here I am. It was near the Gulf of Mexico, which was important to me. And as far as the sunny and warm went, I think maybe I overreacted a little bit. But
Maybe add a little humidity in there.
I grew up in Philadelphia,
Okay.
and it gets just as hot there, just as humid there. It just doesn't last as long. So strangely, when I got off the train in 1984, I came down from Seattle on the train with a backpack, the deal. And it was 104 degrees in Houston that day. And I stepped out of the air conditioned train and said to myself, I'm home. I love it. And I haven't regretted moving here, not for a second.
So did you engage in your passion around art in the time you lived in Houston?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was an exhibiting artist for all these years.
What's, your specialty, if that's the right word?
Paintings and drawings. I don't know how much you want me to go into besides that right now. But yeah,
Landscapes?
two-dimensional visual artist. I don't do sculpture, no performance. What else do you want to know about that?
Tell us a little bit about the art scene in Houston when you got there and what you saw it evolve to.
The art scene in Houston was a mystery to me. There were a lot of art galleries, and I didn't know anybody when I moved to Houston, so it was tough breaking into the art scene, so to speak. And for a number of years, I didn't. I just found myself in one studio after another, struggling to make good work and maybe get recognized somehow. But the interesting thing is, but when I hit 40, I decided to heck with it. I was going to change my life and not be an artist anymore. And I threw everything in the dumpster. I was living south of the Heights at that point, White Oak Drive, where that is.
Sure.
And I had an old storefront there. That's a story for another time. But I moved back to Washington State, got a job tending bar at the VFW in Lacey. And that didn't last long. The climate got to me again. So I came back to Houston and after about 8 months. And I think it was getting back on the horse is what changed my life. I had a studio, got some exposure. I had a gallery within a year. And the next 10 or 20 years have been really good. It's been 30 years now.
What brought you to the hill country? You mentioned a little bit earlier you traveled out here, and did you travel out for the folk festival, travel out for vacation, travel out for art? What brought you here? And then why did you fall in love with this place?
That goes back to when I was in 4th grade, having a teacher talk about Texas, and it was very impressionable, and I went home that night for dinner, and all I could talk about was that I had a teacher that'd been to Texas, and so this was always a magical place for me. Yeah, as far as I got a job waiting tables when I first moved to Houston, and my coworkers were talking up the music festival, the folk festival at that point, so they said, "You ought to go check it out." So I did, and I learned also at that time, being a veteran, that the healthcare here, the VA hospital was up and running back in those days. So since 1985, I've had my eye on this place, knowing that when I retired and was able to get healthcare at the VA, that this was going to be good. And as I drove around the hill country over the years, it's a magical, mythical place. I spent a lot of time at Enchanted Rock in my tent. I love that park. And I don't know what's not to like, really.
So I was 8 years old the first time I came out here and lived in Houston, and I was at a boys' camp and on the Guadalupe River, which I thought was about the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And I'd never seen bluffs before. And I just remember being overawed by bluff over the Guadalupe. And to me, that was as tall a structure as you could have. So believe me, I still, every time I drive from the airport in San Antonio back home now to Kerrville, I still come here with the eyes of an 8-year-old boy and that
Oh, that's
magical feeling. So it's pretty cool. But so did you retire from your gallery in Houston and move out here? How did that part work?
during the course of the years, I was in and out of a couple of galleries. I haven't had a gallery in a long time now. So I'm freelancing, getting shows here and there, have no representation. I've been working day jobs for 40 years too. I never made a living making art. That's crazy to think about. But it was the goal. But no, yeah, I've had a lot of day jobs, tending bar mostly. I tended bar for 15 years in hotels, which was great back in the 80s and 90s because uh, things weren't as tight back then financially, and they fed you and did your laundry. And yeah, there's a lot of stories there too. But I eventually got hired on at Rice University to supervise their wood shop for the art department. And that was a good gig. It was a day job. And when I got hired there in 1997, I decided that's not leaving this job. And so for the next 22 years, I did that, wore a number of hats over there over the years, but retired from Rice in 2019. They gave me a solo show, and then COVID hit. And so for the next couple of years, I think the world just ran in place. But as soon as that lightened up, I started coming back out here and looking for a house. I worked with a realtor for a couple of years before I found a place. And it's a fixer-upper to be sure, but I'm happy as a clam at high tide here. I love it.
So tell us about your work and your art here in Kerrville in the Hill Country.
That's an interesting metamorphosis. My work has been abstract for the most part for 25 years. I was taught at Cornish with a modernist view to contemporary art. And the influences on me in my early days were always the Asian ink painters from China and Japan, the simplicity of the work, the unaffected nature of the medium. And so over the years, I became fascinated also with the scribbles of small children. And I have tried since then for 45 years or so to bring those two sensibilities together. So without looking at the work, it had evolved into a series of linear circular scribbles and whatnot. But in 2005, I was out at Enchanted Rock after a trip to Alaska. Love it there too. Almost moved there. I just looked at a prickly pear cactus maybe for the first time in my life, though seen them for years, and realized that what I really was feeling inside was right there in nature. Had nothing to do with the prickly pear cactus, but the nature of it just captivated me. And so I've been using the prickly pear cactus as an armature for what I'm really after since 2006. And it's just a coincidence that now I live here in the hill country, but my representations of the prickly pear cactus are a bit unorthodox. I call it a distilled abstraction of the prickly pear. And that's what I'm doing now. And I'm having a show, as you may know, at the Creekside Gallery at the Hill Country Arts Foundation. And that's up for another 3 weeks. So I've seen some eyes glaze over, and there's been some people that really like it. So I don't know. I don't know.
We had, the chance to visit with the Hill Country Arts Foundation last week and got their podcast up, so I hope our listeners will go out and, check out your show. Anything coming up in the late winter or early spring that you've got on plan that you can maybe tease us about?
No, I have nothing on the slate. The last year has been very complex, pulling up roots and moving across the state. Hasn't left a lot of time to make art, but things are settling down now. So I'll get back to work, make some new work. The work at the Hill Country Arts Foundation is new work done during the tail end of the pandemic. It dates from 21 to 23 mostly, but it sets the tone for what I'm going to do now.
I'm greatly looking forward to seeing it. I hope that perhaps you can come back on another podcast and talk to us a little bit more, and wanted to thank you for taking the time to visit with us today.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.